All right, teaching history. We have one history major. And what are you?
Missions.
Missions and a math major. So last time we talked, and now we'll talk. So I have a little bit more here. This is scheduled for the whole hour. I don't think that we'll take up the whole hour, whatever it is, hour and a half or time frame. All right, let's talk about several things. First of all, why teach history? Really, it's much more of a general answer than just particularly to history. Matthew 18:19 through 20, the Great Commission there says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost." Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. That teaching them to observe all things includes history, includes math, includes lots of other things. But it really, we need to look at our job as teachers as more than just, they've got to understand American history to be good citizens or something like that. It's part of our job as Christians fulfilling the Great Commission, helping students, young people, more fully understand what God has done through history. It also definitely helps with when you get tired or discouraged. There's a higher purpose here. We're serving God in this, not just helping out our students or something like that. So, all right, so it's the fulfillment of the Great Commission, and I think history fits easily into that mold. We can see God working through history and look at His plan, talk about God's providence. In fact, that's the definition we'll talk about in a second. We can easily see that. Math and other classes can fit into that mold as well. All right, so why teach it? Ultimately, it's part of our fulfillment of the Great Commission, helping teach Christians how to be good Christians. All right, next thing I like to do is mention a definition of history. It's the same definition we've used other places. If you've had me, providential history. And I didn't come up with this wording. It's got some big words in here and a lot of them together. But the superintending, loving, caring hand of God, directing each individual, each nation, each event, each creature. Yep. The superintending, loving, caring hand of God, directing each individual, each nation, each event, and each creature. It is literally God's story. That little short phrase does fit. We can look at how God has orchestrated things through history, and that's I don't always stress it in class. Probably should more, but we're looking at how God has orchestrated things. Sometimes it's easy to see. Think of the Spanish Armada being defeated, or the protection of the Pilgrims when they came over. Some of those things, but even other places, Hitler and the Soviets and things like that, still is part of God's plan. We don't understand it all, and we could look at it and say, how could God do that? That's so unfair, or this or that. But it's part of God's plan that we have to accept that. Psalms 107, as well as other places, shows us the whole psalm really talks about this God in control and His providence. Let me just read you some verses out of that. I'll try to give you the number of the verse if you'd like to have it. Verse 6 says, "Then they cried unto the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them out of their distress." It's talking about people calling to God and God delivering them. Verse 7, "And He led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city of habitation." Again, God directing, God superintending each person, each individual. 8, "Oh, that men would praise the Lord for His goodness and for His wonderful works to the children of men." God's goodness, God's work to us. Verse 35, a little bit further down. "He turneth the wilderness into a standing water, and dry ground into water springs." So there we have God controlling even the weather and the ground and the water. Verse 36, "There He maketh the hungry to dwell, that they may prepare a city for habitations, and sow fields and plant vineyards, which may yield fruits of increase." All right, God in control of even those things. Verse 40, "He poureth contempt upon princes, and causeth them to wander in the wilderness, where there is no way." God in control of the rulers. And then verse 43, the end, whoso is wise and will observe these things, even they shall understand the loving kindness of the Lord. And if we're wise, we'll look at the world and see God's hand directing and controlling. All right, so that's real easy to see here, the providence of God, His superintending, loving, caring hand operating. The New Testament also mentions this idea. Colossians 1, 16 and 17. It says, for by Him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by Him and for Him. And He is before all things, and by Him all things consist. He created them, and they exist because of Him and for Him. He's in control. Okay. I don't especially think you will argue about a providential view of history. All right, so that's the viewpoint we want to get across in history, that it is God's plan. This is God's story. It's not just, you could pick up Marx or other people, and they'll take history and they explain it all differently. Marx, I think, is kind of funny if you discount all the death and carnage he's created, but he says all of history is a struggle over property, and if we just get rid of property, then there'll be no more fighting, no more strife, and we have live in this happy communal setting, like the Soviet Union. But that's how he explains history. It's the struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor. And all through history, that's been the struggle, and he wanted to remove that problem. Hopefully, we can look at all the strife through history and think, well, we have people with a sin nature, and that's what's at the heart of those things. Okay, so a little bit of philosophical stuff there about why we teach history in particular, or just teach in general, and then a providential definition of history. All right, the next thing I like to do is a little bit of just practical nuts and bolts. I don't think this is especially unique to teaching history, but since I'm here talking about history, we'll fashion it that way. The next thing I talked about is planning out the year a little bit. Just a couple of general thoughts, but you want to make sure to take some time, especially the first time you teach a class, to plan it out. You want to make sure everything important fits in. Hopefully, at least the two that graduated from here didn't have a history class where the teacher just started teaching, and wherever you got to in the book, that's where you stopped. Hopefully nobody did that to you. But I had history classes like that. And we just go along, and wherever we got to, that's where we got to. We never got to the end of the textbook. All right, you want to sit down at the beginning of the year. Did you guys have that? Hopefully they finished it. Maybe not every page in the book, but they covered all of the whole span of time. So I remember a couple of history classes where it was, we'll just see how far we get, and just, we never got to the end. But you want to sit down at the beginning and think about it. There is more going on in history than you could possibly talk about, and you're going to have to pick and choose. And you want to at the beginning of the year plan it out. You don't have to write down all the lessons and the particular notes for the day, but you want to take the broad scope of everything and fit it in for that. For a high school level, elementary level, you're going to think about the entire year, even for a college level. I do this a semester at a time, and I know how much I need to get done first semester or second semester, and I write down every day of class and the topic I want to cover that day. So with a high school class, I didn't always necessarily do it every day for the entire school year. With college, it's when you meet twice a week for one semester, that's not too hard. But I would definitely plan out what I was going to talk about every week, for the whole year. So get everything in that you need to. All right, so you want to do that at the beginning, and also you want to make sure you take some time to do it right, especially your first time in. It's going to be fresh. It's you're going to have it's something new to you. Take some time. There is, I remember being tempted to say, well, I'll just kind of get through this year, and next year I'll take what I did the first year and really polish it and make it good. I didn't do that, and I was very glad, because the next year I had another new class that I had to put together, and I pretty much had to do what I did the previous year with the first one. All right, so you are going to get other responsibilities. You can't assume the next year you're going to have time. Plus, you can't forget about the kids that are in the class this year. You don't want to cheat them. So take some time and plan this thing out. and do a good job with it as part of your responsibilities. Okay, now a couple of points here about how to plan out. First of all, you want to decide what should be covered in the class. This might be really easy in some cases. You might be assigned a textbook and said, here, cover this year. Then, you cover the textbook. But you definitely want to, as a Christian, think biblically about a topic. What is included in, if we're talking about history, and you want to, we got to include God and the providential view of history, and so you want to think about everything that needs to be included, everything from just the mechanics, which battles, which wars, what time frame we're talking about, what countries we're talking about, all of that. I taught geography one year, and I started out by trying to get a good definition of geography, which really includes it's basically everything. It's the land features, the political boundaries, the people, the culture, the history, the language, the government structure. Geography really can include just about everything. So you're thinking, all right, I've got to cover all. It forced me then to narrow it down and cover the important things. But you want to make sure you have a good idea what needs to be covered. Again, it might not be a whole lot of work depending on the situation, but take some time to think about this so you know what needs to fit into the schedule. Okay, second thing is you want to start by planning out the whole year. With my pre-cal class, which is in history, I know. But I sit down and I look at the entire year, and I look at the chapters, and I've kept track from year to year how long I typically need for certain chapters and different things, and I fit them in through the year. I'm going to do chapter 1 here, chapter 2, and just kind of block it in by week for the most part. But you want to start by the whole year, fitting all those pieces in. All right. Then the second or third thing, however you got it labeled down, is once you've got the whole year done, then you go back and take smaller sections and drill down and figure out what you're doing each day. Plan Monday is a lecture on this, Tuesday we're having a quiz and a lecture on this, take that out. That I usually do from test to test. I know what topics I want to cover in there, and I plan from test to test. Some places, you might have to turn in weekly lesson plans or whatever. But you want to plan out the actual day, what you're going to be doing for that section. I really don't think it's a good idea to do this for the entire year all up front. I know people that have done that, but to me, that if it really is something that you're going to be looking at and following, I don't know. To me, that doesn't work very good. There are changes, and it's easier to not plan that far ahead. So anyway, figure out what you're doing each day for that whole time frame, whatever's convenient. Here I either do from test to test, or at the start of the school year, I go all the way up to the first candy cell, which you guys know that's a pretty significant break. I want to try to end there at a decent point. So you want to figure out what you're doing each day. Then once that's done, you want to then think about the actual lesson for each day. If you want to spend a day on the pilgrims, well, then you got to figure out what things about the pilgrims are we going to talk about. And you want to start putting together your actual lecture material from that. All right. In that process, it will force you to pick and choose, and you won't have to cover World War I, the Cold War, Reagan, and the War on Terror in the last 3 days of school. You will pick and choose, and when you're talking about the colonies at the beginning of the year, you'll cut out things that are less significant because you only have so much time. Right? It forces you to make that selection early on. And probably Rachel is thinking, there's no way I'm going to cut anything out because I'm going to need every little bit of material because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of stuff to say. I don't know. That's the way I was when I first started teaching. I said, no, I need everything. But it didn't take very long to where I'm thinking, there's no way I can cover all this. And you have to let the less significant things go and make sure you're covering the important things. And this forces you to make that selection all the way along and not do the crash course of the 20th century part of American history. Okay, so an actual lesson for each day, and we'll talk a little bit. Well, I might as well do it right here. I really like teaching from notes, right? As opposed to having a textbook and you kind of underline and highlight stuff and you walk through it with the students. I really like teaching from notes. I think it forces the teacher to be prepared a little bit more because you actually have to sit down and organize a lecture and put it together. Something else that I really like about having my own lecture material is that it allows me to gather information. It provides at least a place for me to gather information and outside sources and illustrations or quotes. I have a place where I can drag those and put them in. If you're teaching from a textbook and you come across this really great quote by MacArthur that you want to read the kids, I don't know, you can write it in the margins or it provides a ready-made place for that. To me, that would be kind of a secondary thing. I really do think it forces you to really think about what you're going to teach and do a better job with it. So anyway, I like the notebook. So anyway, when you're actually putting the lessons together, an actual lecture, I think, is better. I even do that in pre-cal. Well, you guys have me in pre-cal. I have notes that I speak from. Okay, last thing here, still with planning out the year, is keep track so you have something to reference. You have this great plan that is perfect and will never have to get adjusted. That usually lasts till about the second day of class. And then the principal say, "Oh, next week we're going on a field trip." And you think, "Wait, that's my test day. We can't do that." Keep track. I try to, especially with the high school class where I teach every day. Sometimes I would lose track of it, but I try to jot down what happened every day. We got this far, covered this topic, so I have a real, an accurate record of how long things took me. Sometimes I've looked at that and thought, wow, we took way too long for that one topic. I've got to shrink that down, and it forced me to look at that subject and refine what I want to talk about and only get the important things. So anyway, give me an accurate record. It helps with planning and helps you identify places where you may have spent too much time, or you might find something really important. Maybe you spend 3 seconds talking about George Washington and you realize you spent a whole class period on Henry Ford. Right? And I say, wait a second, that's a little lopsided. I mean, let's do, it helps you identify things like that. So anyway, an actual real class log or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't have to be fancy. Lots of times mine is, especially in a high school class, would just be written, just have kind of a handwritten thing of what I did, since it wasn't always convenient to go to my computer. So, all right, so plan out the entire year. That will take some time. Just getting to the point where you start writing lessons will take you a significant amount of time if you're really going to think about it. You've got to get all kinds of information about the school year. You've got to know when the breaks are, when the kids are out of school, when Christmas starts. All that stuff you got to gather. Hopefully the school helps you with that some and doesn't force you to just, aimlessly guess. But you got to pull that stuff together. It'll take some time to plan that out. Okay, questions about planning out the school year? History teachers, how do I say this? I think it's easy in a history class especially to wing it and just start blathering and not really have a plan. So don't let yourself do that. The whole field of history lends itself more towards liberals and that type of thing, as opposed to engineering, where in engineering, if you're wrong, the building falls over. It's really easy to tell. Yeah, in a history world, if you have the wrong idea, it's not quite as concrete. So there's lots of history teachers that they just kind of wander aimlessly, and don't do that, Rachel. Don't be a liberal, and don't wander aimlessly. Okay, next thing I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some methodology, just some things about actually teaching. All right, first a little bit about lecturing. I have here what to do and what not to do. We'll do what not to do first. All right, you don't want to just dictate the notes, read them and then read them slower and then, and allow the students to write them down. You do want them to write things down, but man, that is extremely boring for the teacher as well as for the student. So don't get into that rigid mechanical thing. There should be some obvious structure to whatever you're talking about, and the students should be able to pick up on that, I hope, if they're thinking and alert and awake. But you don't want to fall into the routine of, all right, capital letter A is, and they write it down. Okay, now capital letter B, and they write it down. Very boring, and it also trains the kids to shut their mind off and wait for you to say the next Roman numeral. So now there's a little bit of balance there. If you've got younger grades, they need much more help. Did you teach the 7th and 8th graders? Or did you have a combined?
I was a combined.
Okay, yeah. The younger, the 7th and 8th graders, note-taking is pretty new to them. So the younger the grade, you'll have to give them some help. But you want to try to wean them off waiting for Roman numeral 2 before they start to really pay attention. So anyway, don't just dictate the notes like that. It's bad for the students. It's extremely dull for you. Especially as a new teacher, it's pretty easy to fall into that trap, but you don't want to do that. All right, so that's what not to do. Now what to do, and I've struggled with the right way to describe this. This is the phrase I came up with. You want to teach a topic. Who wants to be the guinea pig to volunteer some topic that you're familiar with? It doesn't have to be even school related. Sewing, cooking, martial arts. Inflation?
I have to teach you a lesson on inflation tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, wow. Who's that for?
Mrs. Miller.
Oh,
for this class.
For this class.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Oh, let's get something less academic. How to make green salsa? Do you like to make salsa? Sure. I was a little bit hesitant there. No, there's nothing that you... Sewing, cooking. All right, let's go with green salsa, for lack of a better one. If somebody said, how do you make green salsa? You're probably, hopefully, not going to say, all right, Roman numeral 1 is this. Roman numeral 2 is this. You will give them probably some ordered steps, and it'll be obvious as you're teaching what the progress is. You'd be teaching them how to make salsa, not dictating to them a set of notes. So you'd say, all right, you got to get green, those, and some hot peppers of some kind, jalapenos, and you got to dice them up really small. You throw them through a blender.
Boil them first.
Okay, boil them first. Then you throw them through the blender. I don't know, I just show up and it's on the counter at home. It's much easier that way. But there'd be a set of steps that you talk them through, and there'd be some pointers along the way. Don't rub your eyes after you cut the jalapenos or whatever. But you're not going to say Roman number 1, capital letter A, small 1. You're not going to be doing that type of thing as you're just talking about something that you're familiar with. All right, so that's what I mean by teach a topic. You're going to be teaching them how to make salsa. You're not dictating notes to them. You're teaching them how to make salsa. Now, sometimes there's some. In either case, you want them to get that basic outline down. So you don't want to throw that out completely, but you don't want to fall back into just dictating notes. So that's why I have here, teach a topic. That's what you're trying to get across. I have here, if you're trying to explain to somebody how to change a tire. You girls ever do that? Okay, you're not going to hopefully say, all right, capital letter A, pop the trunk, small number 1. You wouldn't do that. You say, all right, get in the trunk, find the jack. There'd be an order, obviously. But you're not dictating notes. Okay, so you want to teach a topic. That is for lack of a better phrase, that's what I have. That's what you want to do as you're lecturing. So, okay, one other thought here with what to do is you want to try to get the students to think. You want to try, or at least keep them engaged, keep them part of the lecture. You've all sat there probably today after a nice lunch, and your mind is disengaged from what's actually happening as you drift away with Alice into Wonderland. Or not Alice. Was it Wonderland when she went down the rabbit's hole? Okay, Wonderland, yeah. I was thinking of Anyway, go with her to Wonderland. You're there with the Queen Rabbit, execute them first, and then wasn't it a rabbit?
It was a rabbit, but it's not the queen.
Okay, whatever. I just remember the one phrase, the execution first and then the trial or something like that. You're there as we're teaching. Try not to let your students do that. Okay, you want to try to keep them engaged. Sometimes it was simple as, that's why I wasn't really thinking of this, but that's why I asked, what's something you're good at, and then we can use that as an illustration. At least one of you is paying attention, and the others are hungry. So, yeah, what? Thank you. So, okay, so what to do? That's pretty simple to state, but that's a tall order to do that effectively. So, all right, some other points here about lecturing. I have what to do, what not to do, just some other points here. If material is taught properly, if capital, bold, underline, asterisk or something, it should be relatively easy for the students to pick out what's important. Now, we're talking about a student that pays attention, the ones who are half asleep in class and borrow notes from other people's because they didn't really take any. They might have trouble. But the ones who are paying attention, they should be able to pick up on what's important. Today in government class, Tamar is in there, I think. I said everybody should be able to think of, I forget exactly, everybody should be able to think of at least one thing that might be an essay. And Hazlett's lesson is something we've hit it every day for 4 or 5 days. Because it's that important, and I've said over and over, this is so important. This is, try to emphasize it. And it should be obvious. They shouldn't, hopefully, especially for major parts of a test, essays or big things like that, they shouldn't get there and say, wow, I can't believe that was the question. I never would have thought of that. They should look at it and say, well, yeah, I did talk about it a lot. That was something that was stressed. All right. So if something is taught properly, they should be able to pick out what's important, or at least have a good idea of what you think is important. So, all right. I missed something there. That was
They're just saying how it's hard with Dr. Bola to figure out what's important.
See there, he's such a bad teacher.
Yeah, that's a big report.
Yeah, I know. All right, another comment here about lecturing is don't bluff the students. If you don't know something, it really is best just to admit it. You don't have to say, I'm really stupid, I don't know the answer. But don't make it up. All right. At some point, they're going to find out. And it might be before they're out of your class. And then you've got to face them when they know you just made it up. Or if you can imagine, an 8th grader going home and telling their parents about something that you made up. And the parents realize, that's not true. All right, so don't bluff them. Now, you should find out the answer. I mean, don't just say, I don't know, and completely ignore it. Find the answer, especially with the easy access to the internet. You can just Google it and find the answer. Not in class, do it later. You can find an answer pretty quick, and you should. But don't bluff them. I know I've been tempted several times, and nobody wants to. I could probably think of examples where I tried, but I try not to. Nobody wants to stand in front of class and say, I don't know the answer, right? Because you're the teacher. But don't do that. All right, last thing here with lecturing is the ultimate goal here of this is to get them to understand whatever you're teaching. The history lesson, what's going on in the Spanish-American War, or how we got dragged into World War I. That's the goal. All right, the goal ultimately is not to get them to pass a test or that type of thing. Now, those tests and other things like that gives us at least some concrete measure for how well they've learned the topic. But really, those things should just reflect how well they've learned the topic. Your goal is to get them to learn that. With that in mind, that's why I don't do it. I know I'm not trying to criticize people who do, but I don't go through every question on the test beforehand.
That'd be nice, the essays.
Yeah, I resist that because in my mind, I think if I've taught them well and they understand the material, then they should be able to answer the essay questions. I don't have to tell them up front what they are. So younger grades, I would give them the essays because they have trouble pretty much with everything in life, even throwing away their trash. I would help them much more. But anyway, I hesitate and kind of drag my feet about saying, all right, you want to know these 3 things for the test. Now, I did violate my own rule this morning by dropping a hint with the Hazlets in one lesson. But So anyway, the ultimate goal is to get them to understand, not just to pass the test. I've had teachers who did that. To me, it encourages the students not to pay attention if they know that they can just wait for a review before the test and write down all those questions. I knew of a teacher who, the review, they read the whole test and threw a few extra questions on. Well, why pay attention for the last 2 weeks? I could just write that down frantically. So anyway, the goal isn't to just get them to pass the test. You want them to understand the topic. So, okay, questions about lecturing. All right, 2 more things here. A little bit about testing, quizzing, homework, that type of thing, and then some classroom help. We're here till 2 o'clock. I don't think we'll take that much time. Although we have gone overtime before when it was. Well, I've got to be in class at 1:55, so we can't go too far. All right, normally we've got about 10 minutes left or less. All right, testing, quizzing, homework, that type of thing. All right, first here, testing and quizzing. I have those two kind of together. If a student understands, then he should be able to get a good grade. If he understands. And the opposite is true. If they don't understand, then they shouldn't be able to get an A. I mean, maybe a B or a C, depending on how much they don't understand. But as you make the test or the quiz, your goal there is to weed out those who understand and know the material and those who don't understand and know the material. It's not just to see if you can pick out the most obscure little detail to see who happened to memorize that detail and throw that on the test. It's to weed out those who understand from those that don't. All right, so there's 2 errors there. I mean, you could make your test so hard that everybody flunks. That would be failing here to recognize those that get a good grade. Or you can make the test so easy so that everybody gets a good grade. And there again, you're failing. You're not giving an accurate report to people about how they did. So, and that's tough. It really a good test or quiz isn't easy to make. It doesn't happen instantly. You've got to, at least I have to sit and think about it. And I don't know that I give good tests. Please don't tell me. But I really keep this in mind. I don't want somebody to pass my class who doesn't understand Hazel's lesson. I mean, that's just, or at least I don't want them to get an A. So I try to craft the test so that if they don't understand those things, they won't do as well. Okay, so testing and quizzing. Homework next is that I just have here, it should be reasonable. Not too easy, not too hard. You could make it something completely trivial where they sit down in the 5 minutes between classes and throw something together. Or you could make it unreasonably hard where they spend 3 hours doing their history assignment. Used to have the high schoolers read the Federalist Papers and answer it's actually the same questions that I used in the government class here. Those were originally high school. I would give them multiple homework nights, and we would work on them some together. But to give them that on a Monday and say, all right, tomorrow I want you to have read this whole Federalist paper and answer these questions. At a high school level, that's a little bit overbearing. I'd say cruel and unusual. At any level, probably, right? Not just high school. So anyway, the homework should be reasonable, not too hard, not too easy. And that again, there's an art to that, and you've got to judge it really not so much upon how quickly you could do it, on how quickly the average student could do it. That's what you got to judge it on. I had a teacher once who said, he was a calculus teacher, so I could do this in 10 minutes, and I'm not you. Right? It was a test, and we had gone. I think it was an hour and a half class period, and we had gone over about 20 minutes, and he's saying, I want to go home. And I don't think anybody had finished. He said, this should take 10 minutes. We're not you. We don't have a doctorate. So anyway, it should be based upon the average student, how long it should take them to do. And that, again, you're not the average student. You're the teacher. So there's, you want to balance it out. So homework should be reasonable. One other thought here about homework, or at least a couple other thoughts, is if you give a long-term assignment, you want to factor that in. If you say, all right, we're going to on a 5-page research paper on something, there's a good chance wherever you end up teaching a school that the principal or some administration person will be involved in in the large projects about when they're due. But it is appropriate, and I think good, and you should recognize that. If you say, oh, they've had this assignment for 2 months, I mean, what should be the problem? And all the way along, you keep hearing them with homework assignments. At what point are they supposed to work on this thing? They can't just create time. So if you give long-term projects or bigger projects like that, that should be reflected. And you could be perfectly fine and good to just not give homework some nights and say, all right, tonight there's no history homework. This is a night for that paper. All right, whether you use it or not, I'm not going to check, but there's no homework. So anyway, you want to recognize that. So be reasonable. All right, and also with reasonable, you want to make sure you keep the schedule in mind of what's happening. All right. Most churches and most Christian schools, there's other things going on than the school. All right. A good example is what's happening tonight with the recording. All right. There are some of our high school kids that will be in there from 3 till 10, roughly, if I understand it right, or whenever. What's that?
That won't be at work my time.
You won't.
I work 3 to 10, so they can get used to being in college.
Yes. Right. I mean, there'll be adults, there'll be all kinds of people there. The strings and woodwinds, I think, are tonight. I talked to the teachers, said we want to work with these students. Right? They are doing something to help the church out. It's not like they're going out to the playground for 7 hours. They're recording something for us. So we want to work with them. And a lot of the teachers either are just not giving homework to those kids or gave it to them last week. I know Mrs. Wright gave Emily her math homework she's already got tonight's and tomorrow night's done. So you want to work with them, and that's part of being reasonable. To just, say, well, suck it up and be a man or a woman, or figure it out. We're talking about high school kids or elementary or junior high kids. You want to be reasonable, all right? So reasonable. It should be reasonable. All right. Still here with testing, quizzing, that section. You want to strive to have clear questions. Clear questions. This is also something that's not necessarily as obvious as it might sound. Think of this question. Where was George Washington born? Wow. Think of all the answers that are right.
In a house.
In a house? On the earth? On the U.S.? North America? Virginia? Whatever county it was? Whatever city it was? Right, so unless there was some other material there to pinpoint what you wanted as the answer, that's not a very clear question. You could say what city, what county, what colony, etc. You want to make sure the questions are clear. Try to have them clear. And if you get a question that's not clear, then you need to be willing to accept any answer that answers the question, not any answer. It might not be the answer you were thinking of, but if it actually answers the question, then you want to accept it. There was this year, Mrs. Jennifer Wright had a math student. There was a section that said mentally calculate, or something like this one section. They wanted them to do it in their mind, and you can they did it in their mind. They never wrote anything down, and it said do it mentally. So I really think the kid did it, but never wrote it down. So, okay, I think Mrs. Wright probably left herself a note next time that do it mentally and then write it down physically or something. But it actually answered. It fulfilled the requirements. So I had a question. I didn't make it up, so it's not my fault. In my math book yesterday, it asked for, as a financial question, asked for the total interest that had accumulated in an account. Gave you an initial deposit, the interest rate, how often it was compounded, and all that kind of good stuff. And they're supposed to. They asked for the interest. The book's answer gave the total balance, the principal plus the interest. And I had some students give me that, some give me the interest. I guess now I think about it, that's not necessarily a poorly worded question. It was just answered wrong by the textbook. But I ended up taking either answer because they asked for the interest and not the total principal. So anyway, you might think, of course, it's obvious, to not have tricky questions or questions where the answer is not clear, but you really do have to think about it. And I have been surprised many times by a question that I thought was really easy, and I get these answers on the test, and No. And I say, yes, that's right. I have to give it to you. And you really want to. So one other comment before we leave the clear questions is don't let students just argue their way out of legitimate questions. You do want to recognize if a question wasn't clear. But on the other hand, if it is clear, it's wrong. And you will have students occasionally that really want to argue the point and try to, they're taking every possible nuance of the definition of the words to explain how they misunderstood. And no, it was clear, it's just wrong. So there's a balance there. If the question really isn't clear, you should recognize it. But if it is clear and they answered wrong, then it's wrong. All right, so strive for clear questions. One last comment here with this testing, quizzing, homework section is essays can be a very, very good way, especially in history class, or it can be other places as well, to find out what students know. All right? Their short answer can be used, true and false questions actually are very, very good for distinguishing between, you can put a statement there that's almost true and really see if they're paying attention. That's not really a tricky question. It's one for them. But anyway, essays I think are very good. They force a student to express much more of a complete thought. It's more, they have to do more than just list out some points. They've got to put the whole package together and state it in a coherent manner. And depending upon the age level, you want to be very lenient with coherency. Maybe if the words are spelled reasonably right. I'm kidding. The level of coherency would change with the level, but it can be a very good gauge for that. It's not necessarily the only gauge. I'm really beginning to appreciate how a well-stated true or false question can be very effective. All right, and it's not to be tricky, but I mean, you can have a statement that sounds really good and just have a slight shade of something that's wrong. And you want to see how thoroughly the students understand. So that can be done. But an essay is another good way. They are a pain in the neck to grade, because you actually have to read them. You have to have your mind engaged while you're reading the essays. They do take time, but to me, I think it's worth it. But don't assign more essays on the test or quiz or whatever than you can read. I mean, they do take time if you're going to do justice to the kids. So, all right, testing, quizzing, homework, questions there. Last thing, probably the easiest one is just some, I just have it labeled classroom helps. There are all kinds of things available to bring some spice, to go back to our green salsa analogy, into class. You can do PowerPoints, DVDs you can play, videos, you can live stream things. There's all kinds of visuals you can bring in, pictures, in a history class, primary sources. I might be teaching a high school history class next year. I'm excited about that. I'm already drooling about dragging out.
Which class?
I'm not sure yet. It's still speculation. But I'm kind of excited about it. But to me, again, I acknowledge that I might be weird. But if you're talking about George Washington when he's going to Fort Duquesne, and you can have the kids read some diary entries from somebody that was on the trip. Now, to me, that's fun. That's exciting. There's lots of things like that you can bring into class. So don't feel tied to just your textbook and the pieces of paper in front of you. You can bring other things in to really spice this thing up. There's audio files. There's all kinds of stuff you can bring in. There's a balance. You could make your whole class just fun videos and audio files every day, and you don't want to do that. But there's lots of things you can bring in to make it interesting. My brother had a class once. It was the Vietnam in film, I think.
The whole class?
Yes. And all they did was watch different movies about Vietnam, and they would analyze, what message the movie was saying, and don't do that, especially in a Christian school. That was at Valpo, which is kind of Christian. But, yeah. So there are lots of things to bring in that can really contribute and bring some life in your class, and that's true for other places, not just in history, but especially history, since that's what we're talking about.